So should we nudge you if you get tired?
I've had plenty of coffee. I'm good to go.
Okay. Uh-oh. Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to bring the session of the Public Service Commission to order. Secretary Burgess, is there any changes to be made to the agenda today?
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. There's no changes to this morning's agenda.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. And in order for us to have enough time on the regular session, what we're going to do today is take this a little bit out of order, and we're going to do the consent agenda first. So I'd like to ask the commissioners, are there any comments or questions on the consent agenda?
I have.
Do you have?
No.
Okay. Commissioner Berman?
Yes. Could you, can I have our General Counsel just clarify the two CES consent agenda items?
Yes. Mr. Agresta?
I'd be happy to clarify the clarification. Okay, so there's two items under CES. Item 370 is a clarification. In the CES order, there was a number stated of 0.6%, and it wasn't clear by the way it was stated in the order what that number was meant to be. That number is the progress towards the goal for 2017. It is not the mandate that the LSEs will have to achieve during 2017. The actual mandate is only 14% of that number. The rest of that number is going to be achieved through the New York Sun and the customer-sided tier programs. So the clarification is simply that the LSE mandate is 0.035% rather than 0.6%. And so that has implications for both the people who have behind-the-meter resources as to how those resources are treated, and it also has implications for how much the LSEs have to acquire in 2017. But the clarification doesn't change any of the numbers. It just clarifies how they're characterized. Do you have any questions on that one before I go to the next one? Okay. And the next one is item 374. And 374 is action on a petition by NYSERDA. NYSERDA's petition is not a petition for rehearing. A number of CES petitions for rehearing were submitted. None of those are on the agenda for today. They'll be dealt with at a future session. So this one was in the CES order. The Commission asked NYSERDA to submit a petition stating what the administrative costs would be and for both the REC and the ZEC programs so that plans could be made for adders to be put onto the ZEC and REC costs so that those, in other words, it costs money for NYSERDA to administer those programs. It has to get its costs from the participants in the programs, and so we needed to set an adder prior to the beginning of 2017 for RECs and prior to April 1st for ZECs so that NYSERDA could begin to collect those costs. NYSERDA's petition proposes that the one-time costs to set up the whole system for the new programs under the CES order, instead of being collected from ratepayers in an adder, actually be paid for by monies that have already been collected from ratepayers and that NYSERDA has on hand in a cash balance. The recommendation in the item is that the only additional collections would be for the annual administration cost for the ZEC program, and there's an adder in there for that. Also in that order is a NYSERDA proposed standard contracts that it would enter into with the LSEs to implement the CES order. There's over 100 LSEs that will have to sign a contract with NYSERDA for the purchase of RECs and ZECs, and NYSERDA wanted a standard contract so it didn't have to individually negotiate over 100 contracts. and parties had an opportunity to comment on it, and we received their comments, and the item goes through the comments and approves a standard contract for both Rex and Zex. And then finally, NYSERDA proposed a backstop process so that if an LSE can't meet its obligation, for NYSERDA to be reimbursed, and the order includes principles for that backstop process, but it also requires a collaborative process to work out the details and to come back to the commission yet again. So this is just one of the many implementation steps that will be going on over time as the CES order is implemented, and there will be additional implementation steps in the future.
But just to be clear, NYSERDA's petition with respect to the administrative costs was in response to the Commission's directive to identify what those costs would be. So this was their compliance actually with our decision.
That's correct.
So the commission will have an opportunity to look further, and commission as a whole, in the implementation plan and different things that come before us?
Yeah, the implementation plan is not a single document. It'll be a number of implementation steps, and they will come to you over time, and you'll get another chance to look at all those things and to vote on them as envisioned by the CES order.
Right. And to clarify, we're not deciding the petitions for rehearing at this time?
No, not at all.
Okay. On those two, I have no further questions. Thank you.
I did want to note for the record, just NYSERDA has done, I think, a very good job of managing how to implement the CES program at the lowest cost. So, frankly, what they've been able to accomplish through various efforts, I think, is that they're anticipating that the whole of the program, both the REC program and the ZEC program, on average, will cost residential consumers about 15 cents a year. So if you think about what we're doing, 15 cents a year, it's a great buy. So any other further questions on the consent agenda?
Yes, I have two. On item 371, can you just clarify what we're doing on this item?
Which item? Can you read it so people know?
I'll wait till Paul gets to it. This is addressing the time of use issue.
It's Marco, why don't you respond to that?
Sure. So this item is adopting a voluntary time of use rate for National Grid that was actually submitted in compliance with the commission order in the rate case 12E0201.
Okay, so the issue that I have is this docket was opened in 2012, was part of the rate case which was decided, and at that time, when the rate case was decided from a joint proposal, there was in the order a decision not to definitively decide the time of use issue and to have the company work with folks and put together a report, which they did December 20th, 2013. Thereafter, we, in track 2, in our REV proceeding, we were looking at and are still looking at time of use issues. And so my confusion here is, since I've looked at the full docket, that there's been nothing in terms of a notice or a SAPA on the report that was issued, and that was back in 2013. So it seems like for some folks that this might come out of the blue in our decision making on what we're doing here. And my concern is whether we are being clear in our processes where folks were focused on the track 2 order and the time of use issues there, and now it sort of pops up what might appear to some folks myself included, to be out of the blue in decisions. I don't necessarily have a problem with the substance. My concern from a process perspective is what if, from the time that that 2013 order was written, there have been different thoughts, other parties who may have been interested, and we might benefit from a fuller discussion to make sure that this is the right place to decide that, since people seem to be focused on deciding it in the Track 2 processes, including, I think, some of the REV demos, or at least one REV demo. So from my perspective, the focus I have in looking at the regulatory certainty and making sure that when we are doing things, we're not making things less clear, and in fact, people can follow where we're deciding or where we may be deciding things, and the opportunity that they may have to weigh in before that decision. Because my fear is that afterwards we may hear from folks who have different thoughts from the report, since we never issued it for a notice or comments. And as far as I can tell, having looked at the docket, which had a lot of different documents in there, there was nothing that indicated people thought they had an opportunity to comment on it. So for this item, I'm going to be a no, purely on the sense that I do think we need to make sure that we are fully engaging all parties, including the public, on items that may be relevant, especially when we can look to other areas that are already underway examining them. If this report had been written recently, I might be less inclined to vote no, but since this report was back in 2013, I'm really very hesitant to, in a broad brush, say, okay, and adopt this going forward. So
First of all, I don't, because this was on the consent agenda, I don't like to have things on the consent agenda where there's a dissent because people then don't know what we're talking about. Either Scott, Marco, or Paul. I think that this thing has been amply noticed and that people know had plenty of notice, and there was a lot of good conversation about why we were doing this. So do any of you want to kind of explain for the other commissioners why Commissioner Berman's concerns may not be a concern that others share?
I'm going to pass that to Marco, but I want to apologize to Marco because I was the judge who suggested that this needed to be segmented from the rate case and handled
blame you.
separately back when it started, and I know Marco's aware of that.
Thanks. Just to be clear, the report and the associated draft tariffs were SAPA'd, went through the full SAPA comment period, and there were no comments provided by anybody in the public. Just to add a little bit additional information, everything in the rate design behind the voluntary time of use rate that staff actually worked with the company in developing reflects a lot of what the commission has expressed in the Track 2 order under REV in terms of getting both a time differentiated delivery and commodity rate and attempting to reflect costs during periods of time when they incur costs by the utility system. So in my opinion, the rate that is before us is very reflective of the direction that REV is moving toward, and I would, fully support adoption of the rate at this time.
Thank you, Marco. You're welcome to join us anytime, too, up here. But, I agree. I mean, I think, first of all, as we said in the REV proceeding, time of use rates are a very important element of giving customers who want the opportunity to engage in activities to reduce their energy use to see that reduction reflected in their energy bills. And it's probably one of the cheapest ways that we can go forward in looking at gaining energy efficiency and the ability to get an opportunity to actually see this happen in action is something I know that National Grid is really anxious to do. The other piece, I believe, of this raise is it also allows as people add on electric vehicles to get the advantage of seeing what it means to plug in your car at night, which is when prices are low, and this could be advantageous to the system. And so there's nothing but good that comes out of this experience, and certainly I think there's been plenty of a debate and earlier on time of use, and so I don't think there's going to be any confusion. And as we've said frequently at this commission, there's nothing but experience that can help us get to the future, and so moving on these things as opposed to delaying them, I think are very, very important. So any other comments on the consent agenda?
Yes, I do want to follow up, and I thank you. Just want to make sure that folks understand that I'm not substantively opposed to this. In fact, I think that it's necessarily could be a good thing. My real clear message is that we need to be clear on the different dockets that we're following. And when people are focused on other areas where we're talking about electric vehicles or time of use, especially when it's in a more generic proceeding with the Track 2 and being moved forward in that way, that to the extent that we're now dusting off a old report from 2013, especially when at the time that we made that decision on the joint proposal with the rate case, we had robust conversation, discussion on that, and we decided that we needed a fuller record, which was why we had the report. So to the extent that I'm cognizant of the fact that there are other times where we're moving in one direction in another proceeding and it pops up somewhere else, I think it's very important for me to look and say, even if I'm okay with this, it may be an opportunity to make sure that folks have had an opportunity to give information in a timely fashion, not a few years later. And since they didn't, I would not like to see that we then are subjected to not having a as detailed record as we could to make sure that we're laser focused on those issues. With that being said, I do look forward to our continued dialogue in the Rev Track 2 as it relates to time of use and how that may play out, especially as it may affect, in the residential sector, a number of different folks, including the low income.
Okay, I understand that's your concern, and you don't disagree on the substantive issue, Commissioner Berman, but I'm going to be really clear on this. There was no procedural objection for us moving forward. In fact, the utility wanted us to move forward so they could implement this and get the experience, and there's been no objection. So I don't want any confusion that somehow or another this isn't something that everybody wants us to do. With that, I'm going to take a vote on the agenda. Do you have any further comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to pop in on this. I know when I was in the legislature, many of the elected officials were really interested in New York moving to a time of use rate as something they thought was beneficial. So as the chair just said, I think there's a lot more support for this than people may think.
So, Commissioner Sayre, do you have anything? Because
I would
we
just
should
say,
have put this on the regular agenda.
I would just say in general, I'm a strong supporter of voluntary time of use rates, and I hope this particular structure will spark some interest and be a success.
Commissioner Berman?
Yes, I'm going to move to item 372. Item 372, if you can just give me a brief explanation on this farm net metering item, I'd appreciate it.
Who wants to take that? Michael?
Sure. I'll
Mr.
take
Warden?
that. So the primary focus of 372 is to raise the cap on farm waste net metering from 1 megawatt to 2 megawatt to comply with the most recent PSL changes. That's essentially the reason for this item.
So we're implementing a statutory change.
Correct. The Cow Power Coalition did raise some concerns about billing, that the item offers a way of addressing. We would be addressing these outside of the item if we didn't have an item, but the essence of the item is to raise the cap from 1 to 2 megawatts.
This is something that the agribusiness, particularly, and agricultural waste was looking for. So, and obviously, that's a very important market because U.S. or New York is leading in this area, and many of our farmers are looking at these types of projects that could be beneficial to them.
They're very anxious to get this 1 to 2 megawatt cap raised, again, in compliance with the change to the PSL.
Right. So this PSL section 66-J, I'm very familiar with, and looking at it, I do think that the parties who submitted comments made a compelling argument on their concerns and the need for us to look at ways that we can promote and advance their on-farm anaerobic digester systems, and looking at ways that we can work from the perspective of different processes that they're concerned about. We have in other areas when it comes to process issues, interconnection issues in particular, which they also raise. We have had an opportunity where we have an ombudsman looking at those issues and working with folks. I am laser focused on the need to make sure that we fully understand the farmers' concerns here. So I'm highlighting it as understanding the importance of it, but also to the extent that it references Public Service Law 66-J, there is a pending petition for rehearing on another aspect of the net metering, different from the farmers, which has been pending, where I did dissent. That dissent does not conflict with my decision to go forward here. In fact, in some ways, to the extent that here we are saying we can't go further because of the statutory construct that limits us at this time, and we're implementing the statute amendments that are necessary in the tariffs. I do just want to highlight the need to address the ongoing petition for rehearing, which, again, with net metering, there are many different proceedings and many different focuses with that. So to the extent that there may need to be some clarification overall, it's important to me that we're laser focused on making sure that we're taking into consideration all the competing interests and the issues relevant to that. So thank you.
I appreciate your concern on that. Actually, as a matter of fact, I think the order calls out the fact that the issues related to pricing is something that is being addressed in the value of distributed energy resources docket. We recently received staff's white paper on that, and would expect are going to be getting comments, and we'll be looking at that, and so that's one piece. The other aspect of concern that folks have raised is around interconnection processes, and we've got numerous activities both at a technical level working with the utilities to address those concerns, as well as I know some pending proceedings to make that work better. Plus, of course, we have put in place the ombudsperson to work with distributed energy resource providers as well, of all types, and as well as NYSERDA has done the same. And I also want to note that the utilities have also put people in place to work with developers to make sure that there's focus. So I would think that we should all, one thing that I would say is there's many activities that are going on, and people are very focused. It's I think a big attention on part of our staff, but also many others, because one thing that's happened in New York as a result of REV is we've really changed the turned the corner on this, and our utilities, rather than looking for ways to impair or impede distributed energy resources, are working very hard to figure out how to put in place best practices. And I'm hearing from a lot of the utility executives that they're really pushing on their folks to rethink these things and be the smartest people on the block. So I would say more than laser focused on this, we are definitely advancing well beyond other states in our thinking on how to work with distributed energy resource providers, and it's something I think we should all be proud of. Mr. Wiener.
Yes, I just want to make the point that the agribusiness interests, and specifically cow power, have been and continue to be very active participants in the value of DER proceeding. Of course, that report was recently issued, a staff report and recommendations was recently issued. It's been submitted now out for comments, and initial comments are due in a couple of weeks.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Any other comments on the consent? All right. So I'm going to move. All those in favor of the items on the consent agenda, please indicate by saying aye.
I'm aye for all except 371. As to the process, I'm dissenting, and as to 370 and 374, these are the CES related items, and I am concurring as I did in the original majority opinion.
With that in mind, and hearing opposition to only one, all the recommendations are adopted, and we can now proceed. So thank you. So we're going to turn now to the regular agenda, and before we proceed on that, I do want to note that Senator Ritchie is with us today, and I certainly want to note my appreciation for the support and continuing support that Senator Ritchie has provided to the agency, and certainly on the topic of the Fitzpatrick plant. So welcome, and thank you for joining us. So first of all, before we proceed on this matter, I think everyone has been Mirandized on the rules of this agency. So, we appreciate everyone's attention. We think this is really in a very critical matter. We are appreciative of the fact as an agency we get to contribute so much to this state, and welcome everybody here, but would ask that you respect our process and respect each other. So we ask that there be no commentary, no noise, and that if you have a sign, you don't block the people behind you. So we would ask you not to lift your signs so that folks who might want to see our gorgeous faces can see them. So with that, I'm going to turn to Mr. Belcito, who will be introducing the matter. And so on the regular agenda, we're talking about item 301, which is the joint petition for the transfer of the Fitzpatrick nuclear power plant and declaratory ruling. And Anthony Belcito is in our counsel's office, will be presenting this item. And we have staff also available for questions. So, Tony, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. As you say, the purpose of today's session item is for the Commission to consider the joint petition of Entergy Nuclear, Fitzpatrick, LLC, and Exelon Generation Company, LLC, for the transfer of the James A. Fitzpatrick nuclear power plant from Entergy to Exelon. This matter has generated a considerable amount of interest by the public, but from a regulatory point of view, the matter before you is relatively straightforward. In fact, your review under the Public Service Law and the state's Environmental Review Law comes down to 4 essential questions. These tests are the same tests, or the same questions, that the Commission applies to every Section 70 transfer petition. First, to consider is whether the transfer will cause significant impacts to the environment. Second, does Exelon, the buyer, have the financial and operational capacity to make the transaction economically feasible and to operate the plant in a safe and reliable manner? Third, will Exelon's ownership create the potential for undue market power, Exelon's ownership of the plant, as well as its existing assets? And fourth, is it appropriate for Exelon, as the new owner, to be regulated in the same manner as the existing owner, Entergy? As I'll describe, it is staff's recommendation that the proposed transfer passes each of these 4 tests and is in the public interest. Therefore, joint petitioners under the relevant statutes are entitled to approval of the petition. A little background on the plant. The Fitzpatrick Nuclear Plant is located in Oswego County and has a generating capacity of approximately 882 megawatts. It began commercial operation in 1975 and is operating under a license from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that does not expire until 2034. Fitzpatrick is an important contributor to the state's clean energy electric resource portfolio. And on November 2nd of 2015, Entergy filed a formal notice of intent to retire the Fitzpatrick facility. Exelon wants to purchase the plant and would like to keep it running. On July 22nd, 2016, Entergy reaffirmed that the Fitzpatrick facility will be permanently retired if the transfer to Exelon does not go through. Regarding the first test, the environmental impact test, approval of the transfer is not expected to have any significant negative impacts on the environment. To the contrary, the transfer will facilitate continued operation of the facility and maintenance of an important source of clean energy for the state's retail energy customers. The transfer does not involve construction or new construction or any physical modification to the environment or to the existing community. Excuse me. Further, approval of the transfer will not result in the creation of environmental hazards or result in any adverse change to natural resources. To the extent approval of the transfer facilitates continued operation of the Fitzpatrick facility, impacts from that continued operation have already been considered when the NRC considered and approved the license through 2034 of the Fitzpatrick facility. As to the second test, the financial and operational capacity test, Exelon has an investment-grade bond rating and has the necessary assets and revenue to be financially qualified. It also has significant nuclear operation and management experience. It currently has ownership interests and operates 13 nuclear plants consisting of 22 generating facilities, including several in New York. As to the third test regarding market power issues, staff has reviewed the impact of the transfer on the relevant markets and recommends that the Commission find that no horizontal market power issues or concerns exist that are sufficient to warrant disapproval of the transfer. As to vertical market power, Exelon does not own any transmission or distribution assets or facilities that would be used to give preference to its generation assets. As to the fourth test regarding the appropriate regulatory regime, in the past, the Commission has considered at great length the appropriate regulatory regime for nuclear facilities. That regime is currently applied to Entergy's operation of the Fitzpatrick facility. Staff recommends that nothing in this transaction alters the reasoning or circumstances relevant to the regulatory regime of the Fitzpatrick facility and that the same regime should be applied to Exelon if the transfer goes through. The recommendations I have summarized here are described in much greater detail in the proposed order, along with an analysis of all the comments that we received regarding the petition. If you vote to approve the recommendations, you'll be voting to approve both a negative declaration regarding the likely environmental impacts of the transfer and approval of the transfer and regulatory regime sought in the joint petition. This concludes my petition. This concludes my presentation, and staff is available to answer any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I agree that, or note that the factors that, as Tony has talked about, that we look at when there's an asset transfer for determining the public interest are factors that the Commission has applied in many, many asset transfers in terms of what is the public interest, how do you define it when someone's selling a generating plant in a competitive wholesale market. And I would think we could all agree that these factors have withstood the test of time, which is I think, probably the best test of whether we're satisfying the public interest when we look at these types of things. You know, we do worry about the environmental impact. We worry about whether there's an adverse impact on the competitiveness of the wholesale markets. We certainly worry about whether or not the new owner of the plant is going to be able to operate it in a reliable and safe manner. Do they have the financial wherewithal? And of course, then the other question that's before us today, which I think is whether we should continue to forbear from applying all aspects of our regulatory authority and oversight and what's relevant in the context when you have a competitive wholesale market and owners of competitive generation, and whether or not that balance that we strike in terms of how best to regulate in this context should continue as is. I think, as Tony mentioned, that these are very straightforward analyses from our perspective and very consistent when we apply them, have applied them, and they've worked. And so for my purpose, it's exactly what we should do here. I recognize that this is a significant transaction for the state, that it's obviously very critical for the state to be able to meet its environmental objectives. But in my opinion, when you have something as significant as this, that is the time for actually consistency, and it would be certainly inappropriate for us to vary how we look at these transactions to determine how best to proceed, either because of or in spite of the importance of this transaction to the state. So I am very comfortable that the requirements that we've imposed are consistent with the requirements and the analysis we've done in the past, and I intend to vote for the recommendation. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Sayre.
This is a business as usual case. I concur with staff's recommendation that transfer of ownership here has no negative impacts on the environment and does not create undue market power. The proposed new owner is fully qualified financially and operationally to run the plant. That's enough under our settled process to approve a transaction like this, and I see no reason in this situation for us to abandon our settled process for determining what is in the public interest. So I, too, will be in favor of this item.
Commissioner Berman?
I think I have a question for Warren.
I spent the entire election season yelling at the TV, so I was watching it on TV instead. I apologize.
We can do it that way if you want. Could you explain the market power tests, the horizontal and the vertical, and go through
Sure.
the differences for people to understand?
Sure. So horizontal market power is whether or not you have a large enough share of a particular market to withhold some of your output, to drive the price up, and do it profitably. Vertical market power basically requires horizontal market power in one market and then using it to leverage a related market. In this case, the most important related market is transmission and related markets are transmission and generation. And just to get rid of vertical market power quickly, they own no transmission or distribution resources in this state, so that was a no-brainer. They really didn't have an opportunity to leverage monopolistic ownership of the wires to enhance their profits in the generation market. Horizontal market power analysis, in this case, there was a filing from the joint petitioners that pretty much follows the FERC approach to horizontal market power analysis, HHI analysis, which is really just sum of squared of market shares. Look at the market shares and then square them and sum them. And the reason for squaring them is because it exacerbates or enlarges the large ownership of market share by squaring it. It really emphasizes when one or more parties have too much of a share of the market. In this case, Entergy currently owns in the entire New York generation market about 7% of the market, and Exelon Constellation about 6% of the market, which makes them fourth and fifth in line behind larger owners of shares in the market. And it really just swaps a little bit of that. It swaps about 2% on the entire market, where the market share from Entergy goes down from 7 to 5%, and the market share for Exelon goes up from 6 to 8%. So they just switch positions from 4 and 5 to 5 and 4. But we look at, in New York State, I know I'm a little biased, but I think we do a better job and more focused job at looking at market power than the FERC does. And so we looked at all the traditional things that we look at for market power, given the specific things we know about each individual transaction. Looked at them here just as we look at them in any case, including when these were divested from the utilities, when the nukes were divested from the utilities. And it raises, according to all that due diligence, zero concerns from our office's point of view.
Thank you. I'm going to save my.
Please proceed now, because I'm going to ask Commissioner Ackenpower to go next.
Right, I'm going to save it for when I vote in my explanation of my vote.
I would ask that we just do our comments now.
It's part of my decision, for my vote.
Commissioner Ackenpower.
Warren, you had mentioned that, we do our examination better than FERC. That's no problem. I like to hear that. However, and I don't know who will answer this, are there other agencies that need to look at this either on a state level or a federal level?
Typically, it's us and FERC who approve this.
What about the Department of Justice?
Well, they certainly implement the antitrust laws in this country, but there's a lot of state action going on here. So I'm not going to opine on the law.
They might advise FERC, but I don't think there's an actual approval from the Department
Right, but
of
they
Justice.
advise then FERC. Has that been approved or disapproved, or when does it go there? Do we know that? It just happens.
There's a pending proceeding at FERC, right?
I would think so, yeah.
On the same, under Section 203 of the Federal Power Act, there's a petition, and FERC will look at it in due course.
And they also go to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, but not for market power
Right,
issues.
yeah, okay. Well, as Commissioner Sayer and the Chair has already said, I've been here long enough to know that this is a straightforward, and Tony, you did a very good job in laying this out. So this is nothing new under the sun as part of the work product that we do here and have done all through the years. So I will be voting in favor of this item.
So now I'm going to move to a vote. Commissioner Berman, would you like to now comment?
Yes, for my explanation on my voting, yes. So I do think that this is a significant item, and when I look at it, it comes to me in what is my obligation as a decision maker. And I have, as my colleagues have, spent tireless hours going through the record and hearing from folks on both sides of the issue. Public Service Law Section 70 is really the vehicle right now for decision making and the legal standard of review for that. And there's really three prongs that we have to look at. We have to first look at the financial viability of the buyer and whether they have sufficient financial resources to make the transaction feasible. The second is whether they have the ability to render safe, adequate, and reliable service from the facility. And then the third comes down to the market power issues. If those three are met favorably, then the transaction can go forward. There's been a lot of side issues that are in this proceeding, very important side issues, but the public interest legal standard really comes down to those three. At times, we can get lost in those side issues, and there may be opportunities where we address them. But we also have to look at what our jurisdiction is and what's in our lane. And what's there right now are these three prongs. So for me, when I look at side issues like NYPA's letter of credit or the decommissioning funds, neither of those are under our jurisdiction. Those aspects are not part of the decision today. They're not going to be coming before us. The same with the NYSERDA agreement. Our decision today is separate and apart from those, and it's separate and apart from the Clean Energy Standard as a whole. So when I look at this, I'm very mindful of the passion on either side, but I am comfortable in voting for this at this time because the public standard legal review has been done, and I believe that all three aspects, prongs, are met, and therefore it's important to recognize what we've done today with that and understand that it is a transaction under the Public Service Law, Section 70, and the other aspects are not under Section 70 and therefore don't come before us for decision making. So I want to be clear in what I am voting for, so I concur in that.
Thank you. So, first of all, I appreciate all of the work that the staff has done on this, as well as the parties, and the commissioner's attention. Also, appreciate the attention of the folks in this room and your respect for our process. Clearly under the leadership of Governor Cuomo, as well as the legislature and the responsible administrative agencies, we're doing something really important in New York, which is to show that if you pursue climate change and the battle against climate change in a balanced way, you can achieve both the environmental objectives and economic objectives. And that what we can do and what we're doing today with this type of proceeding is showing that we can get to where we want to go in terms of reduction of fossil emissions in a way that's both good and necessary for the environment and also good for the economic pocketbook. It's although we didn't plan it, it's interesting that we're discussing this matter during a time when people are in Morocco trying to figure out how do we effectively combat climate change across the world. And what I'm hoping is that the leadership that New York is showing, the path that we're taking, which is to recognize that what's good for the environment, it can also be good for the economy, is a path that I believe can show the rest of the nation and the rest of the world that we can get there when you get there in a deliberate and planned way. Now, I recognize that there's some folks who would like to see the nuclear plants closed, but that really does, as we said in the CES order, fly against the fact that every time a nuclear plant has closed, it's been replaced by increased fossil emissions. That's what we've seen, certainly are seeing in Germany today and are seeing in the New England states. And so what we're recognizing is that by maintaining the operation of the Fitzpatrick plant, not only as well as the other nuclear units in the CES order, not only are we retaining thousands of jobs, we're also helping get to our goal in New York to reduce emissions by 40% by 2030, and doing it in a way as the least cost from an economic perspective through the entirety of the CES. So while what I would like to think about, because, as we talked about when we approved the CES order, we really are the last generation that's going to be able to combat climate change, is rather than fighting, let's figure it out. We have a lot of wind we need to develop in New York. We have a lot of solar we want to develop in New York. There are a lot of other renewable resources that we want to develop. We want to pursue an awful lot around energy efficiency so that we can get to our emission reductions. And to me, what we're looking to do in New York is to make sure through these types of through today and through our actions in August, that in the end, what we're going to be able to show is that we can achieve both very important aspects for the environment as well, and do it in a way that's economical for the state. And I would ask and invite everyone to now let's get on with it and really move forward in where we need to go. So with that, I am going to move to a vote. Do you have a further comment?
I just want to make clear that as to the pending petitions for rehearing, none of us, including you, have are taking a position on that, on pending dockets.
No, I'm not taking a position on pending dockets, and thank you for the clarification. I'm really talking today about reiterating why we need to move forward with this transaction and why we approved the CS in the first instance. So with that, and thanks for the clarification, I appreciate that. Let me, all those in favor of the recommendation on to approve the transfer and continued lightened regulation as described, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing no opposition, the recommendations are adopted. So thank you very much for joining us. We'll take that. But are there any other items that come in front of us today, Secretary Burgess?
There are no further items, and the Commission's next meeting is December 15th in the New York City office.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Diane.